everybody. Welcome. Happy Friday. I am so excited that we're all here, and I've got to say that there has been a huge spike in support and growth over this last week, and I can't help but say thank you. Thank you so much. I will be thanking patrons at the end of the episode, but last week I had Randal Rouser on, and we wound up talking about proper basicality, and we didn't really get into the moral argument as much as we wanted to, but it was good. I loved the conversation we had, and I'm happy to say that Randal came back this week. Hey!
Whoa! How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for coming back, man.
Sure. It's good to be here.
I'm glad. Let me turn this down just a little bit. There we go. You were echoing for me just a bit.
Oh, gosh. I don't want that to happen.
No. It's hard. The conversation is hard enough. If you came in twice, I don't know if I can handle it. Okay. And also, just so people know, there was a little bit of an issue with timing. And so, Randal, you were gracious enough to come in quickly, last minute. You were whipping things together. I really am grateful that you're here, man.
Yeah, I got home 10 minutes ago, so we're good to go.
Cool. Alrighty. So last week we kind of left on a bit of a cliffhanger. Of all things, we were talking about Nazis. And so I kind of want to refresh and kind of get people back into that mindset. So I'd love to kind of go over a little bit of what I remember and then see what you remember out of it and go from there. We talked about what makes something properly basic and whether or not something properly basic has any bearing on whether or not that belief is true. Now, you can say that you're justified in something, believing in something because it's properly basic, but you could also extend that same thing to things like aliens. And because of that, I remember I said that I was going to hold on to that piece just because while I understand that there's value in having conversations like that, it doesn't really lend itself super well to truth, whether or not a thing is true. And I remember you brought up, you said, Eric, that's very pragmatic, but there is value, just not truth value. And then we moved into talking about morality. But before I talk about morality, I want to make sure that I'm not, gish galloping you. Is there anything in there that you want to add to that or adjust on that?
I'm curious, do your listeners know what the gish gallop is? That's a little bit of an arcane reference, I would have thought. I like it.
Yeah. Oh, good. Oh my gosh, I'm arcane now. Thanks, man.
Cool. For those who don't know, Dwayne Gish was a younger creationist, and he would debate people who defended biological evolution, and he would raise all these sort of really quick objections and could not reasonably respond to all of them in the short time. It was a kind of a rhetorical way of getting a leg up on your debate opponent in that case. So, yeah, I don't think you were just galloping for sure.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't want to come out with so many different ideas that you just don't have the time to address each of them. So is there anything you want to add to proper basicality before we move into morality?
So where this is, first of all, the context here is what we call epistemology or the philosophy of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And actually, the pursuit of the philosophy of knowledge is essentially concerned with truth. Because knowledge is just that phenomenon in which we have the right relationship with truth so that we can say that we know something rather than just have a belief about that thing. There are many things you could have beliefs about, and those beliefs could be true, but that wouldn't automatically make those beliefs something you know. For example, you could believe something and have very deep conviction about it. Like let's say that you went to a fortune teller, right? And the fortune teller tells you who's going to win the Super Bowl next year, and it turns out that person does win the Super Bowl, and you believed it. It wouldn't follow, presumably, that you had knowledge, unless you could justify the idea that the fortune teller had the right relationship with truth and formed their beliefs under the right conditions so that they could transfer knowledge to you. So when we talk about the kinds of questions like proper basicality, they are actually really closely connected to truth. Now, what I said last week is that having a theory about knowledge and the nature of knowledge and the nature of justification or rationality does not in and of itself tell you how to adjudicate different truth claims. And so that's where there may have been some I don't know, misunderstanding is the right word or something, but it is very much concerned with truth, but it's just at a second order level. And we could also talk about the evaluation of specific truth claims, and that would be sort of a first order evaluation of truth, but it would occur in a theoretical context, such as moderate foundationalism, that the view that I defended last week.
Absolutely. I got to push back just a little bit there. But if we are talking about second order, are we playing word games at that point? I'm kind of curious. Like, you know, it is true that you believe X. That is true. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the thing that you believe itself is true, right? Is that what you mean by second order?
No, well, so I'll give you another analogy for what I'm talking about here, the distinction. So if we switch to another field like ethics. So in ethics, you have both normative theories of ethics. So for example, you have deontological, utilitarian, situation ethics, virtue ethics. Those are all theories of ethics. And then you also have specific ethical debates, such as a debate about the ethics of abortion or the ethics of euthanasia or some other topic. And so you can debate about a specific issue like abortion or euthanasia without explicitly appealing to the normative ethical framework from which you're working. And that's why you could have a utilitarian and a deontologist potentially arguing about the ethics of abortion, but they're each doing so from the perspective of a particular theory. So this theory itself in this case is the second order normative framework in which the arguments are made, but the arguments themselves are the first order debate. So is abortion ethical? Or to switch back to epistemology, the second order normative framework is foundationalism, or as I defended it, moderate foundationalism. Right. But the first order issue would be, is this claim justified? And so again, that's the framework and then the specific claim you're debating.
Well, let's shift that from is this claim justified to is this claim true? I think that is a really important distinction to make. And I know you haven't seen the programs that I'm on, but that's something that I refer back to a lot, as I say that when you're trying to make sense of the world, you reach into your epistemic toolbox and you pull out the best tool that you have available to understand the world around you. And the best we can do is continue to find those tools that work the best and get rid of the ones that don't. So,
well, the only thing I would say in response is to say is it justified is really shorthand for saying, am I justified in believing that it's true? So yes, I agree, truth is central here, but so justification or rationality or warrant, depending on the term you use, would be formed by the framework you're working with.
Sure.
That is essentially related to the evaluation of truth claims. So I don't know that we would be disagreeing on that point.
Okay. So really, what we're going to be investigating and kind of digging into is your justification for the truth claim of God through morality, right? And kind of diving into there. There was one other thing that I had to ask you about because it really it took me on a pretty wild ride, to be honest. And that was noetic structure. So when I first looked into noetics, I found that I couldn't really find very many universities outside of Christian universities that were teaching it. And then I went into the history of it, and it was interesting. Maybe my research was just not good, and so I definitely want to ask you to clarify here. But what I got there was that root is found in the Bible. Actually, it's been around for a really, really long time, and there is a spectrum of things that people mean when they're talking about Oh, I have the word in here, but I just don't have it available. Noose. There we go. That's the root, is noose.
Mhm.
And there are like, man,
And that's not NOOSE, that's NOUS
yes.
for our listeners. Yeah.
Thank you, Randall. Yes, absolutely. I mean, that word has been around for so long that, I mean, it's gone and it's spread its wild oats. It went crazy in college for a little while, before it settled down. And so, it opened up all of these other questions that I had. And I know that's not going to be the basis of the conversation, but it is going to eat me alive unless I ask you, where on that spectrum are you?
The spectrum of
what you define nous to be when you're talking about noetics.
so nous pertains to mind. So noetic structure, that term refers to the structure of mind, and within the context of epistemology, it's the framework of how our beliefs hold together to transfer justification and knowledge to an individual. So it's not a specifically religious or Christian thing. This is just epistemology itself as a field of inquiry. There are three basic approaches to noetic structure. So what I've defended is a foundationalist approach,
Mm-hmm.
which says that justification is transferred from one set of beliefs that are called the properly basic ones to beliefs that are reasoned from them and are non-properly basic. And so those would be, like, again, the distinction I mentioned last week between axioms and theorems in mathematics, analogous to that. And then the second view would be coherentism, which would say that, well, no, really the justification for a belief only arises when that belief is within a coherent whole set of beliefs. And then there's
own little family.
What's that?
Within its own little kind of set group family. I was just adding to it. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, like, specific.
Like
a web of belief. That's another metaphor that's often been used. And then infinitism would be the idea that, in fact, there is an infinite regress of justification transfer. So that view shares with foundationalism the idea that there is a linear relationship between justification transfer, but it never terminates. And so infinitism is sort of a minority position, but most epistemologists would be coherentists or foundationalists like me. Okay. And that's, again, not Christian. I mean, Bertrand Russell was a great foundationalist, for example, and he's probably the leading atheist philosopher of the 20th century.
I liked Bertrand Russell.
Yeah. Good guy.
I like Camus better, but that's a conversation we're going to have on another day.
You know what? They're very different styles of philosophy, right? One's very analytic, and the other's continental, tells it through story and existential rumination.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just for the audience, yes, these are two people who disagree on something fundamentally, who are nerding out about philosophy. This is why we're here. So you defined nous, but there's more to it, right? And there's a lot more to it. When it's referred to in the Bible, it's really kind of referring to this intuition that's found outside of the body, kind of this when I was a Christian, the best way I could think about it was the inner witness of the Holy Spirit. And it can be found referenced that way biblically. And if that was what you meant, then I would say, okay, I think we might be circular here. You know what I mean? And so that not being the case, then I'm happy to plunge on ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm not using the term in that regard. Cool. I mean, if I had my what's called Kittel, which is a major Greek concordance, I could go up and look in the lexicon as to all the uses of nous in Koine Greek, that would give you that list. And I could get all the different ways that the term is used. But the way that I'm using it here is just the way it's used in epistemology.
Cool.
And it's worth keeping in mind that so much of English language comes from Latin and Greek, and that's just a product of our history as a language.
Yeah, I actually lost an entire afternoon thanks to that. So anyway, we were talking about morals, and you had said that objective morality exists. And your example was genocide. You said that we agree that genocide is wrong. And it sounded like you were saying that at all times humans agreed that genocide is wrong, and or that they're somehow misled, wrong, or lying, but that somehow objective belief is still, and I'm just, it confuses me there. It really does. Because, well, number one, you don't know every Nazi. And number two, there is real damage that happens. And I say damage, but when you're talking about indoctrination, somebody can truly, honestly believe a thing. But to afterwards go, yeah, but you were wrong. It doesn't strike me very well. And so I kind of wanted to ask you about that. Do you have, what's your response? What do you think?
So are you raising the issue here that, are you suggesting that there's an objection to the idea that morality is objective based upon the fact that people sometimes disagree about moral questions like the morality of genocide? Is that the idea here?
I mean, I think sometimes disagree is a very light way of talking about genocide. I mean, if you want to say sometimes disagree, when you used that as an example, I gave you an undercutting defeater for that claim, right? Using last week's language, and in doing so, I'm hoping that you have a response to that. That way, we can continue down that road a little bit.
So again, for those who maybe don't remember or didn't see last week, an undercutting defeater is an objection which does not directly show the falsity of a claim, but rather undermines your basis to think the claim is true. And your undercutting defeater is the idea, the observation that people disagree about the ethics of genocide, and that supports the conclusion that there therefore is no objective fact about which they disagree. Is that the argument?
Well, so I had asked you, when you brought up genocide and you talked about the Nazis, I said, we agree, but the Nazis didn't. And you said, well, there's examples of people, regretting it after the fact and they're being damaged. And while that's true, I think that neither of us is the Nazi whisperer. and some people should be taken for, listened to when they say that they want to exterminate an entire race. I'm not saying that it's good in any way, but I'm saying that how can you say that there's objective morality that's accessible? Because inaccessible objective morality, I hope you would agree, is useless. But if there's accessible objective morality, then how come they couldn't access it and you can?
Yeah, so let me start with this. There was a book written a few years ago by, I believe his name is David Livingston Smith, called Less Than Human. And that book goes through something of the history of genocide and looks at the common phenomenon, the common psychological processes by which people justify genocide. And as he articulates in that book, what people commonly do in order to justify genocide and rationalize it to themselves is that they dehumanize the target population. Mm-hmm. They use language such as they're cockroaches, which is one of the terms that was common in Rwanda, or they're vermin, which was a term, of course, used with the Nazis. And what they're implicitly doing then is, this is evidence that they at some level intuitively recognize it is wrong to eradicate human populations. And so the way that they try to rationalize their behavior is by convincing themselves that, in fact, these are not fully human beings. The other thing that they also do is that they impute upon the entire population some justification. So even if they are to some degree human, maybe that population presents a special threat to them. And so for that reason, they need to be eradicated. So actually, I don't think that the fact that people justify this practice is a defeater, an undercutting defeater, or otherwise. The idea that I can have moral knowledge.
Okay, how about suicide bombers? I mean,
same thing. So here's an interesting thing. One of the problems when we have something like a suicide bomber is that we hear about a story like that, and we have no understanding of the explanatory context in which they believed their action was justified. There was a film that came out, I think in about 2005, called Paradise. I believe it was called Paradise Now. And it tells the story of, it's a fictional story, but it could be true, of one individual living in the occupied territories, I believe in Nablus, who decides by the end of the film to become a suicide bomber. And you can maybe understand that Israel was really offended and angry at this film. But what it actually did, it doesn't justify suicide bombing by any means, but it tells a story of how this one guy living in desperate economic and social circumstances believes this is, in his context, a justified action. And so one of the things we always have to do is consider what are the factors behind a person undertaking an action that we believe to be fundamentally incompatible with moral goodness and moral obligation. And I think once we do that, we'll be able to, it doesn't, again, justify their actions, but it at least provides a explanatory framework for us to understand why they acted the way they did.
If we carry the assumption that you're right, if we carry the assumption that there's objective morality and something got in the way, because you're not wrong, they're wrong. They did the thing that you disagree with, but I mean, that just feels imperialistic. I mean, it doesn't feel at all, and I don't think I would accept that. I mean, you can point out cases, sure, but I mean, if somebody's saying that they're behaving in a way that we find reprehensible, immoral, unethical, and they obviously don't, then instead of going, okay, we're talking about objective morality, to which we have, a connection, or we don't have a connection, and instead of going, no, it's not objective morality, it sounds like you're saying, look over there, and I please help me out here, because that doesn't feel right. Why are we letting objective morality off the hook so that we can explain away why that seems to not work for genocide and suicide bombers, when in fact, when you listen to them, in many cases, that just doesn't appear to be the case.
So let me offer a response, maybe do two things. Offer a response to the imperialism charge, and maybe I could also give an argument by analogy. So the imperialism charge, I would argue that adopting a subjective interpretation of moral action is actually the imperialist move, because most people believe that there is right and wrong that is external to them, and they try to live in accord with the right action and avoid the wrong action. And sometimes they directly go against the right action, and then I think they rationalize their behavior and try to justify it. So like this guy that committed the suicide bombing in this film, he believed he was justified. I think he was wrong in that. But nonetheless, he believed it was objectively good what he did, not that it was just his opinion.
Okay.
So I would argue that the subjective reading of morality and the denial that there are any objective moral facts, if anything, that's the quote-unquote imperialist move. Now, in terms of the analogy I want to draw, right now we are, of course, in the midst of a pandemic. Mm-hmm. And there is an open discussion and debate among some people about, for example, the use of hydrochloroquine. There's also a debate about the use of face masks as a way to prevent the spread of the disease. And one thing is clear, there is some objective fact, and it's a fact about people which people currently disagree. And anybody who said the mere observation that people disagree about hydrochloroquine or the use of masks entails that there is no objective fact about whether you ought to use hydrochloroquine or whether you ought to wear a mask in order to prevent the spread. I think that's just mistaken. I don't think that the mere existence of disagreement on those issues is an argument that there is no objective fact, and I would argue the exact same thing when it comes to morality.
I like that, and I can absolutely see where you're pinning that, and that is that we're disagreeing that it's a fact, right? I'm not disagreeing with facts, and so I like that you gave that analogy, because you just highlighted to me where I think we're splitting there. I don't think we're talking about facts. I think we're talking about societal norms, and I mean, whether or not something's uncomfortable or icky doesn't mean that that's not the case. It might make us uncomfortable, and there are a lot of philosophical things that are incredibly uncomfortable. And so, moving on, talking about hydrochloroquine. By the way, just as an aside, did you read about the guy that drank fish tank cleaner because it had hydrochloroquine in it?
Yeah, he died, I believe, didn't he?
Yeah. I mean, there are truths out there. I understand that. And I agree. Something that is true, that we can demonstrate to be true, is true whether we like it or not. I think we're making a category error in talking about morality that way.
So you said that there are facts and there are norms. I'd be interested to know how you define a fact, because the way I define a fact is a fact is an actual state of affairs. And so you can use it with a descriptive sentence to say of what is that it is true. And I didn't come up with that. That's Aristotle. That's what a fact is. It's to make a true statement, to describe an actual state of affairs. So that would include norms. I mean, if a norm is the actual way things ought to be, and that's the unique nature of moral discourse, it deals with oughts, how we ought to be, then you can make moral facts, moral assertions, even though they're norms, they're moral facts. So how do you define fact?
Sure. In my own head, on the fly, I go with that which comports to reality. But if we're talking about norms, we can talk about the things that we do. We can talk about societal norms and all of that, and there are some facts about it. But that does not point to some kind of external origin for those facts. They are what they are. We're describing the world around us. And I think that we're doing the exact same with morality. I mean, let me give you an example. Slavery, owning people as property. Is it moral?
It is an objective fact that slavery is an immoral institution.
Okay.
But let me also be a little more specific. So let's make it as uncontroversial as possible. Mm-hmm. So the institution of antebellum slavery was an immoral institution, and American society objectively improved morally when it eradicated antebellum slavery.
I'm glad. I would take it a step further and take it outside of the United States and say any situation where another human owns another human as property is immoral. It always has been, and it always will be immoral. Whether or not,
sounds like an objective fact, no?
And, well, I'm in a place of privilege because I'm in 2020. And I think that in the future, there will be other things that future generations will look back at us and go, how horrible. And I think that's a part of our growth as a species. I think that, it's exactly the same looking at biblical descriptions of how one should act and how we get to laws. And the way we get to laws is we seek to codify those things that we view as a society are moral. And we write those out. Some of them are, standards, right? Don't kill somebody, for no good reason, right? Murder's bad, true. Yeah. But slavery, man, that just made the books in the last 100 years, 200 years, and it's still off the books in several countries. And so in that way, I see the progress of morality. And when I look at, where those things were codified as facts to be, held forever, I think there comes a time where we need to let go. But regardless, I'm taking us off to the side here. I'm sorry. Let me redirect just a little bit. When we're talking about morals, yeah. I'm doing my best. I'm really trying to describe to you where I see and how I see morals. I think we can both agree that we're at a place where we need to justify this view. Saying there are objective moral facts done is undercut enough that I feel that it is justified for both of us to bring to the table our arguments and our descriptors for why we view it this way. And so I'm doing my best to do that for myself.
Well, the way that you described it sounds to me like you have a real sense of objective moral progress, which would entail the existence of objective moral facts, and thus that over time society is becoming more just. So that if this future society that you talked about that will look negatively back on certain aspects of what we do, if that society reverts to slavery, I think that you and I would say, oh no, that's a big mistake. If they decide to say, well, women shouldn't have the vote anymore, if they should decide to say, certain people should be ostracized just because of their ethnic identity. You and I would both agree that is I think we would agree that is an objective decline in the good society, that we're moving away from the direction we want to go. So I can just give you an argument and tell me what you think of this. So go two premises in the conclusion.
Sure, go for
it. If moral facts are subjective, then there is no such thing as objective moral progress. But there is, premise 2, there is such a thing as objective moral progress. 3, conclusion, therefore, moral facts are not all subjective.
Okay, I get what you're saying. I think my optimism has skewed that for sure. When we're talking about objective, I gave my definition before that I'm willing to be swayed that objective morality exists so long as we're defining it as we're agreeing on what the objective is. And if we're not defining it that way, then no, I don't accept the claim of objective morality. In the way that I'm describing it, it is entirely couched in the example that I gave of how I would accept objective morals or objective morality. So I understand that was hopeful and I took a leap there and I apologize, but I don't think you agreed with me that you were willing to say objective morality exists so long as we're agreeing on the objectives, because you have a different source that you think objective morality comes from, correct?
So I think if I understand you correctly, I think what you're describing sounds contradictory to me.
Sure.
What you're saying is objective morality exists only if we agree on what the objectives in objective morality are. In other words, objective morality only exists if we can agree on what the moral facts are as to what the moral good is and what moral obligation is. And I think that's actually fundamentally incongruous. It's inconsistent with objective morality, because objective morality just is the idea that moral facts would obtain even if we're completely wrong about them. They're not dependent at all upon our common agreement. Morality is not born of consensus by people who think about it. They're just independent facts, just like whether hydrochloroquine is good or not for warding off or diminishing the effects of the coronavirus is just independent of what we or Donald Trump or anyone else thinks about it.
I disagree entirely. For the same reason that I do still very much feel that the imperialistic piece is the one that says, I'm taking my viewpoint and replacing yours with it. I'm not doing that by listening to them and hearing what they're saying. That's you. So when you're saying, that they're equivalent, right? When you're talking about a chemical that we have been able to see is damaging to the body and how people view the world, those are not the same. This is a category error. We are not talking about the same thing. And to do so, I think we'd be throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
I think that to talk about a chemical that is damaging to the body and an institution like slavery that is damaging not only to countless individuals, but to the good society, there very much is an analogy there. That when you perpetuate immoral, unjust, and evil institutions, it hides out the moral core of a society, and the society becomes sick in really an analogous way to a human body becoming sick if it takes hydrochloroquine when it shouldn't be.
Agreed. But I also don't think that you have the answer to morality. And so I don't think that the response that I'm giving leads to any of that. I don't think that working together as a society to build our understanding and our, it's nature and nurture. There's a lot of things that are nature, and there are some things that we're understanding and growing as we're growing as a culture and as a society. I don't think any of those things are diminishing the horror that is genocide and slavery and things like that. I think to do so would be terrible. And I do want to make sure that everybody knows I am against genocide and slavery. To say that people felt that way, didn't always feel the same way as me, isn't diminishing the horror of it. It's just recognizing the reality of it.
I mean, I recognize that people disagree with me, of course, and I can also recognize on any issue, if I have a particular view, I believe that P, and somebody else believes that not P, then we inevitably disagree. Whether that issue is whether hydrochloroquine is good for a person, or whether that issue is whether the institution of slavery is good for a person. What we have to do is, once we recognize that there is disagreement, we have to look for a way to reason our position in such a way that it can be persuasive to the other person. And we shouldn't strawman the other person. We should try to understand their view. And just as I said with the suicide bomber, try to reason sympathetically from their position, even when we fundamentally disagree with their actions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And
it just helps us to reason sympathetically. And then if we reject it, we reject it on the best possible reasons.
Agreed. And I hope you know I wasn't trying to say anything about you as a person as much as I was attacking the idea. Okay, just making sure we're cool. Yeah. Okay. So I get what you're saying, right? If you have two people who disagree on a moral thing, then you're going to need to work together to find how to move forward. Again, hydrochloroquine, drinking it, what if they want to drink it, they're going to find out, pretty quick that was not a good idea. Right. So I disagree on the objective morality piece, and I don't know how we can move past that, because I've given an example of how I think we've gotten there. And I've even, at any point along the way, if we're willing to throw out, hey, we can agree on what the objectives are. And then, if we decide to say, hey, human well-being, human flourishing, is what the objective is, then we can have objective morality, or objective moral values, because we know what the objective is.
So yeah, when I talked about earlier, when we were talking about epistemology, I invoke morality to give a first order, second order distinction. And I said, well, let's talk about moral debates themselves, like the ethics of abortion or euthanasia or something else. That would be, you could call that a first order debate. And then the second order issue or debate would be the issue of the moral framework from which one argues, such as utilitarianism or something else. There is also then a third order debate, and the third order debate is what we call meta-ethics. So that's different than normative ethics, and that's different than applied ethics. Applied ethics, you debate the ethics of abortion. Normative ethics, you develop theories that provide a framework in which you can debate the ethics of abortion. And meta-ethics is behind all of it, and that's where you have your basic convictions, such as moral semantics, which is, what do moral statements do? Are they meaningful? And if so, how do they have meaning? What makes them true? And then you have this debate over the objective versus subjective accounts of moral facts, and that's meta-ethics. So I think that what we're talking about right now is a meta-ethical debate. It stands in behind the normative ethics and the applied ethics.
Agreed. We're just reaching toward the others as examples so that we can illustrate the points that we're making. I mean, I agree. When we walked in, we definitely weren't here to debate abortion. We were here to debate objective morality. And so Randall, I'm stuttering. I think I got broken for just a second. Let me recoup.
Okay.
I appreciate that you're introducing the language. Thank you. That is one of my biggest goals for this channel. And I think that you've done more to bring language to the conversation than I think any other guest I've had. So first off, thank you for that.
Sure.
We're disagreeing on whether or not morals are objective. And I've given my case. Now, it almost seems that when I turned it over to you, instead of giving a case for objectives, morals, like in the positive, you appealed to the inferiority of the other claim. But I don't know what you made to build up your own. And so
yeah, what I made to build up my own actually presented a syllogism, right? I argued from the existence of that if moral facts are subjective, there's no such thing as objective moral progress. Yet there is such a thing as objective moral progress, and therefore not all moral facts are subjective. And I pointed out that, in fact, the very way that you talk about moral change, you do seem to view there as being an objective improvement when society eradicated slavery. And
Absolutely.
you also agree that it would be an objective loss if in the future society were to revert to slavery. And what that implicitly assumes is that there is some objective framework, and we're trying to move society toward the good and away from the evil, which is an objective framework.
It is, because I agree. We're creating the objective. That's why I'm saying it that way. You're not granting that, though, and so I'm trying to step back and meet you where you're at.
Like, I'm not clear. What is the objective we're creating?
Human well-being.
Well, again, human well-being would be part of a normative theory of ethics. And what we're debating here, again, is the meta. That's why I talked about this distinction. This is the meta-ethical question.
Yeah.
So you could say, well, the ultimate criterion of value is human well-being or something else. Deep ecologists say, no, the ultimate criterion of the moral criterion is the ecological balance of the planet. Or PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, say, no, the ultimate criterion is neither of those things. It is the diminishment of suffering.
Right.
And it's not species relative, like a humanist would say. So those are all normative normative moral criteria. But our debate currently is about the meta-ethical framework, which is moral facts, are they objective or subjective? And I said, well, at least some of them are objective, because we all implicitly recognize moral improvement. And just like a society that is becoming more technologically advanced over time and is understanding science and nature better objectively over time, so a society can understand the moral good better over time and become more or less moral based upon that understanding.
Yes, because we are growing our empathy, and we as a society are investigating and learning more about the experiences of others and applying that empathy. And I mean, maybe there will be a different formation at some point in the future. And again, I'm not saying that I don't think that they're objective, so long as you agree with my definition, and you haven't granted that. And so when you're saying, Eric, your language is implicit of this objective point, I'm telling you why that's the case. But I don't think we're going to get anywhere near there unless you grant that if people agree on the objective, then you can have objective morals. Because that would be, by definition, true. I mean, unless you're applying something outside of it, unless you're adding something extra in, and that has to be outside of humans, outside of people, that morality is something that exists in space somewhere. And I mean, there are places we can go. We'll wind up at Euthyphro at some point, I'm sure. But
I'm ready to go there.
I know you are. I'm sure we'll wind up there. That said, Randall, please forgive me. I have ADD, and I haven't gotten my meds refilled in the last few days, and so I'm a little more loopy, a little less focused than I was last time. Please forgive me for that.
I'm just glad we're not having the tech problems we had last time.
I know, right? I still don't know if it was you or me, but I'm glad that we're. Oh, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, let's not worry about blame. Let's not play the blame game. Let's just go with it.
You know what? My show, I will take responsibility. My fault. You know, when we started this, actually, there was a huge echo in your voice that was going across the stream. And as you were talking, I was trying to listen, engage, and do tech maintenance, but that looks like that got better. Actually, let's see. Anyway.
So here's another issue.
Go ahead, please.
Try to keep going.
Yeah, keep us moving.
Yeah. If moral facts are purely subjective, then there's no such thing as objective moral disagreement. But there clearly is such a thing as objective moral disagreement. Therefore, not all moral facts are subjective. So the idea here is that if they're subjective, then they are really analogous to one person saying, I like chocolate ice cream. Another person says, I like vanilla. Well, relative to each individual, both of them could be right. One person could prefer vanilla, one person could prefer chocolate. But two people, when they talk about abortion, let's say elective abortion, so non-therapeutic abortions. Okay. And some people say elective abortion is morally justified. Other people say they're not morally justified. What they're doing is not talking about their relative opinions about something that they just happen to like. They're actually objectively disagreeing about something they believe to be a fact that exists independent of either one of them and their opinions.
How do I want to approach that? So I think abortion itself is one of those babushka dolls of debate that is always providing one shell over another, and inside the very core of that, I think, is what makes a person, what makes a human. And then the next layer is, who has rights, and then you're moving on and talking and bringing in other people. And so that is definitely not an argument that I want to have. That said, I appreciate the example.
Yeah, I don't want to debate about abortion itself, but my point is simply that...
Sure, that said...
Mormon ethicists disagree about it. So, probably the most reprinted essay in modern philosophy was published in 1970 by Judith Jarvis Thompson, and it's called A Defense of Abortion. And in that essay, she actually argues that the morality of abortion, she justifies elective abortion. So for those who don't know, therapeutic would be for some medical reason, either physical or psychological. And elective is just, I don't want to have a child right now.
Ectopic pregnancy, something like that.
Ectopic would be a therapeutic, classic therapeutic. But elective abortion is simply, I don't want to have a child. So she defends elective abortion based upon a famous violinist argument. So people can look that up. But the point is that she's arguing for the objective morality of abortion. And people who have critiqued her argument are saying, well, no, that argument doesn't work for this reason. And so they're arguing again about the objective moral status of abortion, and saying it's not morally justified. And if you want to have a just society, then you won't allow elective abortion. And so for me to say that they are just disagreeing in the way that I like vanilla, you like chocolate, it just is not plausible. It doesn't make sense of the moral debate that they're having.
See, I disagree. I think that's a perfect exemplar of how I can very clearly see the subjective nature of how we view morals. I mean, it's uncomfortable. It is incredibly uncomfortable. But whether or not something makes you comfortable doesn't mean that it's true or not. If that was the case, then I could go right back to Nazis. This time it'll be my turn to bring it up and go, hey, the Holocaust makes me feel terrible, therefore it didn't happen. That's just not how that works. Whether or not something is comfortable or you like it or it feels good to you doesn't mean that it's true. I think there are some things that are true and there are things that are not true. And I don't think morals fall into that category.
So Judith Jarvis Thompson's essay is not simply an appeal to her own moral intuitions. It's a reasoned argument. It's an argument based upon a person who is hooked up against their will to a violinist, and that violinist needs to depend upon their body for 9 months in order to survive. The question is the person that was hooked up to the violinist against their will morally obliged to allow the violinist to have use of their body for 9 months? And Jarvis's argument is no, that person could withdraw support to the violinist ethically and legally and should be allowed to do so. And in the same way, she says, if you find yourself pregnant and you don't want to be, you should be able to withdraw the support that you're giving to the fetus, which you would otherwise be obliged to give for 9 months. Other people object to her, and they have their own counter arguments, but they're not just appealing to intuitions; they're appealing to reasoned arguments.
So I'm following you that people are making reasoned arguments, and I'm following you that those are important. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they don't map to truth values, right? If you were to ask me what is objectively the best thing, I would say it's going to be whatever that woman and her doctor decided. That said, you can have important conversations about things without them being objectively true. In the same way that you brought up in our last conversation, you said, Eric, that's rather pragmatic, to throw out an idea because it doesn't apply. And I agree. Personally, the way I look at it, I see myself as someday I want to be a professional navel gazer, Randall. I want this in my life, and I'm trying very hard to do it. I am a fan of navel gazing. It is my favorite sport. We're talking about truth, though. And when it comes to truth, I don't think that it's been met. Even in your example, right? I'm going to bring it back to your propping up objective morals. What you gave me was a judgment and a statement about subjective morals. I don't know how that props up the validity of your claim rather than undercuts the validity of mine, because I understand we can do that, but I'm trying to also prop up a claim, and I maybe I'm missing it, but I haven't seen you do that yet.
So it becomes subjective if it's facticity, which was a great word we used last week, and I always like to bring that word up whenever I can. It's like, bringing out the Harley Davidson on sunny days. You got to bring out your facticity word. So we can disagree about the facticity of a claim, and then it's an objective disagreement. The thing that makes it subjective is if the facticity itself is constituted by the person's thinking it. So if I like chocolate ice cream, the fact that I think I like chocolate is that which makes it true. And if I cease to believe that, it would no longer have that facticity. Mm-hmm. But believing it is sunny out today, or rape is wrong, or 2 + 2 = 4.
You loaded something in there, and you did it. Hold on.
Yeah, no, because I believe that's how each one of those is appropriately described. And I offer two arguments here. One argument for moral progress and another argument for moral disagreement, to suggest that really you ought to recognize the objective moral facticity of moral claims, just like the objective facticity of these other claims.
Okay. Let me try this a different way. Rape is wrong. And I'm saying that from a place of privilege, living in 2020. And that said, I hope that future generations will continue to agree that rape is wrong. That said, it's still...
Why do you
listing things that are true? Because I've been raped, Randall. It sucks. Okay. I can tell you from personal experience, and I'm glad that I live in a society that's empathetic enough to understand that. That said, so I probably could have been born in a different time, and I have to share this planet with other people. Mm-hmm. And that being the case, I'm trying to understand the world around me. When I left religion, there's so much to it. I mean, I'll just say when I learned about anomie, oh my goodness, when I learned about nihilism, I felt the earth fall out from under me, because I realized that so many things that were being underpinned by my religious conviction were no longer being held up. And so I looked at the world around me, and at first I asked myself, how can we justify morality in this view? But then I realized I was asking
enemy or meaninglessness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying. Yeah. And then I realized I was asking the wrong question. The question isn't how can we, because we are. The question is, why do we? Why do we behave morally? And so when I provided the answer, mix between nature and nurture, right? We talked about it last week, how the human body has, just through evolutionary advantage, we're programmed this way. And that between that and growing society that is becoming more and more diverse, we're understanding and being empathetic and growing that moral understanding, right? I'm doing my best to give you what I feel is the building blocks of how my understanding of morality is there. And you said 2 + 2 = 4, rape is wrong and the sky is blue. Do you understand why I'm seeing that so disparately? How I'm seeing those as not achieving that same thing? I want you to give me that underpinning, because right now my only understanding of it is morality comes from God because God said it. God wants it, and that just I don't understand how that is number one satisfactory.
We haven't even got to theism, right? We've just been arguing for objective versus subjective.
Well, that's because under the hood there, we were talking about theism the entire time, because you didn't grant my version of objective morality because of theism.
No, for me, it's an independent question. I think that you were, first of all, I think that there is a little bit of, I don't want to say conflation, but it seems like we were kind of moving between the normative sphere and the meta-ethical sphere. Again, you would say we need to agree on the objectives, and that would be a debate about the moral sphere of what the actual moral facts are and what's the best way to reason about them, utilitarianism, deontology, or something else. And I've been trying to argue before that in the meta-ethical sphere, which is the sphere of, well, are these objective things? Are they subjective? Are they meaningful, or are they not meaningful? Because, of course, some people, I alluded to this earlier, in moral semantics, they argue, in fact, moral claims are actually not meaningful at all. They're just utterances of approval or disapproval. Like, I like that, or I don't like that. So that when you say rape is wrong, you're not actually making a statement objectively about rape. You're just saying, boo, rape. So that would be a semantic view debate within moral ontology or meta-ethics. And so I think that we've been moving back and forth between those two spheres. So I've said that we could have debates, separate debates about what the moral objectives are, or how we ought to be as a human individuals or society. And that's just a separate thing from the objective facts. But, we've only got a few minutes left. Why don't we just segue explicitly into theism?
Sure.
So there are two different, there are some theists that believe that morality, or the good, the objective good, should be identified with the divine nature. And there are others that believe that and I'd say this is the minority view, that morality would be something objective that exists independently of God, but nonetheless moral duties are constituted by God's commands relative to that objective morality that exists independent of him. That would be like a moral Platonist view. So the first view might be what we call moral conceptualist view, which would be like the idea that moral values or perhaps moral the moral values in some way are constituted by God's own being, their concepts in his mind or something like that. And so there are these two different views. Some views of morality and that theists hold have objective morality existing independent of him. So they say something like Platonism is true, and others identify morality with the divine nature in some way.
Randal, what do you think?
I would be the latter view. So I would believe that there are objective moral values, and they are identical to God's nature, or somehow constituted by God's nature. I'm not sure what the ontological relationship would be there, but that would in part be born by considerations about what we call divine aseity. So this is a very deep intuition that when you appeal to the concept of God, what you're appealing to is a final explanation for things. And so you kind of want to fold all ontological absolutes into that one being. So if morality is part of that, then it's part of God, not independent of God. So that's aseity. And then the other thing here is also, I would argue, Occam's razor, that it would be as simpler as an overall explanation to have one absolute being, God, rather than to have two, God and objective morality.
Entirely disagreed. Yeah. I don't think we live in a universe with an absolute being. I mean, so to say that would be oh my goodness, you just put so much in there right there. Absolutes. Not only is Euthyphro going to come in, but we're also going to talk about how big rocks God can make. Randal, again, this hour has flown by. Unbelievable. Absolutely. And you know, I'm keeping an eye on the live chat, and the frustration on both sides is real, which means well, hopefully we had a good conversation that people were able to benefit from. Randall, I put the same links as last week in the notes. If there's something else you'd rather me pop in there after the fact, just let me know.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah.
All right. Then, sir, I'm going to move on to thank my patrons. But if you want to stick around, I'd be happy to talk to you afterward. I'm just going to scooch on over. All righty. Testing 1, 2. There we go. Okay. If I'm echoing, I apologize. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much. What I was saying was, let me know what you think. I'd love feedback. If you think I'm hand-holding, let me know. If you're enjoying the conversation as is, I'm really enjoying it as well. I want to thank my patrons, and I did not have the opportunity to pull them up by patron level, so I just want to thank all of my new patrons because this has been an amazing level of support. I sincerely, truly appreciate it. I'm continuing to put out content, this and Murphy's Law, every week. And so here we go. I want to thank Queen City Blasphemer, Gary, the Blazing Wizard King. Hold on, let me work my way down. Marissa, Jennifer, Raphael, and Katie, and I mean Phyllis. Like, truly from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I'm incredibly appreciative, and I am taking this as a call to continue to make this. So you rock. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And well, until next time, do something good in your world. Bye.